Welcome to Liberty Alert with Gregory Seltz, sponsored by our friends at the Lutheran Center for Religious Liberty here in Washington, D.C., a program that cuts through the chaos and confusion in the culture today by talking two-kingdom citizenship, bold biblical principles for a robust public Christian life. And now your host, Dr. Gregory Seltz.
Good day, Washington, D.C. I'm Gregory Seltz. Welcome to our program, The Liberty Alert, where every week we try to cut through the noise and take on the issues, especially the public issues that matter to people of faith. Today on the program, we're welcoming back Mike Berry, the General Counsel for First Liberty Institute, and Tim Goeglein, Vice President of Government Affairs for Focus on the Family. Welcome, gentlemen, to the Liberty Alert.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Oh, it's our pleasure to have you both on again today. Unfortunately, the reason for having you on is not necessarily as wonderful because as far as I'm concerned, I'm reading this and I'm saying the issues are becoming more bizarre by the day. Politics is being weaponized in so many ways that I never thought imaginable, even just a few years ago. And now it seems like you can be fired just for having a different political opinion. I mean, how can this be? You know, Mike, tell our listeners about your case against Alaska Airlines for Lacey Smith and Marley Brown. How did it get to this point, and what's going on with the case?
Well, sure. And yeah, thanks for that. Lacey and Marley are now former Alaska Airlines flight attendants.
That's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. And they, so while they were still employed at Alaska, and anybody who's worked in a large company or even a smaller company, you've probably experienced or encountered something like this, where the company has an internal message board of some kind, whether it's via email or an internet message room where the company can share information, or you can divide up in departments and share departmental information and things like that. And Alaska is no different. And they began putting out messages on their on Alaska's internal message room, and Alaska Airlines wanted to solicit feedback from their employees. So this is Alaska Airlines corporate communicating with only Alaska Airlines employees, not communicating with the general public. And in this message, they said that Alaska Airlines expresses its full support for what's known as the Equality Act. Mm-hmm. And just pause for a quick digression. What is the Equality Act? Well, I refer to it as the so-called Equality Act because it was a bill that was introduced in Congress that never actually became a law, but it was a bill that was introduced that would actually do anything but provide equality, right? It was actually a form of discrimination, and it was intended to gut the Religious Freedom Restoration Act and remove its protections in many spheres of life. So that's what the Equality Act.
Yeah, and I mean, let me just jump in on that too. I mean, traditional Christianity becomes illegal if the Equality Act becomes law.
Right, exactly. And it's being pushed by the far left, by the radical left as part of their agenda. And a lot of what we would refer to as, woke corporations have really gone on, fully on board with promoting the Equality Act. And Alaska Airlines is no different. Okay. And so on their internal message board, Alaska Airlines began promoting the Equality Act, and they solicited feedback from their employees and said, tell us what you think, right? As employees, do what are your thoughts about the Equality Act? And one of our clients, Lacey, simply asked a question. And so earlier you said, you can be fired for expressing a political opinion that is counter to the. She didn't even express an opinion. She simply asked the following question: as a company, does Alaska Airlines believe it is possible to legislate morality? That's it. Question mark. As a company, does Alaska Airlines believe it's possible to legislate morality? And for posting that message, Alaska's HR department determined that Lacey had engaged in offensive hate speech and was to be terminated. And she was terminated for that. And a similar situation with Marley, almost identical, expressed her contrary views to Alaska's position on this internal employee-only message forum, and she was fired.
Well, let me ask this question. My first question is, I thought that's what the EEOC was all about, that you could not be penalized for having opinions, that you couldn't be fired for having, and by the way, they weren't being political. The political stuff was being forced on them by the company. Where are their government protections if someone can just say, we've determined that you don't have the right opinion for our company, out you go?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And
so that's what happened.
You mentioned the EEOC, and
Yeah.
you'd think, okay, and to me, this is an important lesson for our listeners and really for all Americans, right? Is that we so often think, oh, well, once this gets to, and insert the name of whatever agency or governmental body or authority that you think is going to be there to save the day, this, Caped Crusader who's going to show up and save you. I mean, remember President Reagan's famous admonition, the scariest words in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. and that's what I think of when I think,
Yes.
oh, well, once we alert the EEOC,
Right.
they'll fix this. Well, okay, let's all be real here. The EEOC is comprised of commissioners who are political appointees. Right. So some of them could be very good. Some of the commissioners and are and have been good, but they can only do so much because it's a commission. Right. And so in this case, they decided that they were not going to take any action on behalf of our clients. And so,
well, let me just jump in there too, because when I think about the kind of thing, the way things are in corporate America, even in 501c3 America too, and non-for-profits, people bend over backwards to accommodate people generally because they're scared that they're going to be punished for not allowing people to be themselves. And here's a company that was vicious and went after people who didn't even express an opinion, but just merely questioned a political opinion. And I thought that the workplace was supposed to be apolitical in that regard, et cetera, et cetera. Tim, I mean, how have we come to a place where you can't even go to work without fear of political pressure on the job? I mean, what's going on in culture that people aren't up in arms about this kind of stuff?
I love that wonderful comment from St. Augustine. He very famously wrote, he said, the truth is like a lion. He said, you don't have to defend it. Let it loose, it will defend itself.
Okay.
And that is, yes, and that is precisely what our friends at First Liberty Institute are doing in this case. Truth is central here. To take a step back, if I may, picking up on Mike's first comment with regard to the Equality Act, for those who have never heard of it or don't know where it's going. The Equality Act did pass the House of Representatives in February of 2021. But I've got some very good news about the Equality Act. It has stalled probably permanently in the U.S. Senate. There are all kinds of major problems with the Equality Act. First and foremost is that if you were to ask the question, what is the number one federal government legislative attack on conscience and religious liberty, you would conclude it's the Equality Act. And that's why I believe that it will not prevail.
Let me jump in on that too, though. But people need to understand that if the Senate would have passed it, it would have been signed immediately by the president who's in office today, because in his mind, that is exactly what needs to happen in this country. Federal laws that begin to persecute the church for believing in traditional morality. And I know that shocks people when I tell them that, but that's what that law was to do. Back to you, Tim.
No, absolutely right. And the great Abraham Lincoln reminded us again and again when it comes to government, you can't just assert, he said, he was echoing Euclid, you have to demonstrate. And that's what First Liberty is doing here. They are demonstrating in the lives of real employees for real corporations who are punished merely for raising logical questions.
Yeah, Mike, so if the EEOC is not going to do its job, or at least it's going to do its job as it sees fit politically, take us through what your argument is on behalf of your clients, because it goes back to things like this. I remember when I was young, the big problem I had with unions is that they wouldn't let you vote your conscience in certain political affairs, because they basically said unions are on this side of the political aisle, not that side. And I'm like, wait a minute, what does that have to do with it? And that's what all the freedom in the workplace kind of stuff was, where if I'm part of the union, but I still can vote my conscience in elections. And I just thought, that's America. That's the way it's supposed to be. Well, obviously not. If the unions are still doing that kind of stuff, and if now woke corporations are saying, if you're not politically on our side, we can fire you just for having a different opinion or even for questioning such an opinion. So take me through your argument.
If the EEOC is unwilling to step in and defend Marley and Lacey, then First Liberty Institute is going to do that, right?
Okay.
We're standing in the gap, proverbially speaking, and we filed a federal lawsuit. And look, we know that this is an uphill battle because we have to go through the Ninth Circuit, and so we know it's going to be difficult. But anything worth doing is going to be difficult, right? And so. Right. This is a battle that we have to fight because just as both of you have laid out, it's no longer about somebody standing in the public square and shouting in somebody's face, right? This is only amongst employees. You're not even allowed to ask questions. And it's not the government, right? It has bled over into private corporations. And people talk about the right of free exercise and, and government should stay out of matters of the church. But the one thing that I've always found to be true in this country, especially as somebody who fights and advocates for religious liberty, is millions of people in this country get up on Monday morning and they get in the car or whatever mode of transportation and they go to work, right? And they work Monday through Friday, and that's how they provide for their families, their livelihoods. They put a roof over their head, et cetera. And so that's that. If you begin to take away that, right, that ability to do that because of their religious beliefs, then we really are on the precipice, right, of going over the edge as a country, as a society, to where you're taking away the ability of people to even have a job and to have a livelihood. And so it's not just about, as President Obama said at one time, right, the freedom to worship, as he expressed it, right? The freedom to work. In other words, within the four walls of your place of worship. Oh, sure, you have the freedom to worship there. And I think that's what he was referring to, is that once you leave your church, your temple, your synagogue, or whatever, you're now playing on the government's terms, and then you're on the government's playing field. Or in this case, you're on Alaska Airlines' playing field, and they get to dictate the rules. And anything you say or do, right, is going to be, if it doesn't toe the party line, it's going to be used against you, and you're going to be denied the ability to have a livelihood, to have a job. And let me make one quick point here, and then I'll turn it back over, which is that Lacey and Marley were excellent employees by every objective measure.
See, that's the key.
They were well liked, they were well respected, they were good at their jobs. Yeah. But then, so what was it that, what was the one thing that they did that you can never do? Doesn't matter how good you are at your job, you can't question the party, right, so to speak. In this case, the radical left, the woke corporations, and because they did that, they're now fighting for
their lives,
the right to live in this country with the same. I mean, let's also think about the fact that we are now in the month of June, right? And it's Pride Month, and we're going to see it plastered everywhere over just about any Fortune 500 company you see. They're going to be celebrating Pride Month. But it seems to me that the one thing you cannot show pride in is your faith. If you show pride in your faith, that's unacceptable. It has to be pride in something else.
Well, and the other thing too, I'm legally, I keep asking every lawyer that I have on the program, there is a distinction between religion and morality, in the sense that all laws, all policy is moral. I mean, it's some moral position, and so we're not asking the government to legislate our belief in Jesus Christ as the Savior of the world. We don't want them to be involved in any of that proclamation. That's the unique proclamation of the church. That's the unique salvation that only God can provide for you, and that's something outside of and bigger than politics and bigger. But morality is something we share. Not just biblically with other people, we share it in other cultures have same fundamental morals like we do. Even some other ideologies have some of the same moral fundamental beliefs that we do. And that's what's being weaponized or made illegal in this case. And all policy is based on some moral position. Why can't we argue our moral position? You know, Tim, woke, secular, and I got to say it this way. There's an anti-Christian movement in our country today. That's what's part of this. You even see not just Alaska Airlines, but Disney, you know, a place that you would think, you know, makes dreams come true, mom, dad, and child. Well, now Disney is jumped into the fray too, and it's going to foster a particular political opinion, whether you like it or not. I mean, is this the way it's moving in the future? And we're not asking people to necessarily buy into our way of thinking, but we're saying you can't kick this traditional Christian worldview out of the public square because it has been such a great blessing to so many.
Yes, I think what we've seen in Disney is a long way from bed knobs and broomsticks, isn't it?
Right.
This kind of beautiful Disney ethos that from its founding was always commodious to family and marriage and parenting in the American experience, and was softly diplomatic the way that we introduced our nation, you know, far beyond our own borders, really has been wrecked. So, you know, that's a major concern for all of the corporations, companies, even small businesses that choose to realign and you know, reframe themselves in this regard. I do want to say that I am extremely hopeful, however, in light of the conversation we're having, because I believe that there are millions and millions of Americans who will learn more and more about Marley Brown and Lacey Smith. They may not know who they are now. They may never meet them, but they will learn through this case what exceptional service people these women are for their company. They are kind of the ideal of what those of us who fly are seeking in the men and women who serve often in very difficult circumstances. I think it's very interesting that one of the women who was fired was highlighted in the company's magazine just a month or two before she was fired. And she was highlighted as an employee who embodied compassion and service to an elderly flyer who had never flown before. It seems to me that the in-flight service on Alaska Airlines and any other airline would say, you know, that's the model. But unfortunately, this kind of kindness and compassion has been too often traded in for a government-imposed ideology.
Well, you know, this comes down to a fundamental issue. And are there any legitimate no's in our lives? I mean, where are those things? And we're dealing, I think, with a movement called libertinism. That's what the 60s was all about. It came to fruition in the 60s, kind of a secular libertinism. There is no God. I can do whatever I want. Love the one you're with. And then here comes this statement: honor your father and your mother. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Thou shalt not covet. And there's people now in some ways despise those barriers, if you will, or those fences, if you will, that prevent us from going over the edge of what we could be if we just did whatever we wanted. I'm going to throw this in here just for both of you to kind of comment on. I love Chesterton says it this way, and I love reading him because he dealt with the secular movement of his age. He said he didn't like Christianity when he was young. I'm paraphrasing now. He didn't like it because it seemed like it put too many barriers down in life. And then he said, but where those barriers were placed, he suddenly realized that's where God wanted them, so that freedom, true freedom, could run wild. If the barrier's not there, you run over the edge. So think of horses on the plane bumping into the fence, but if they bump into the fence and get back on the plane, they run with abandon. The wind is in their hair. You turn the lights on, they don't stop. But if you turn the lights off and you take the barriers away, they stop running. And I think the libertines are the ones who want to take the barriers away, and they want to turn off the lights and then tell you to run as fast as you can. And I think that's who we're up against. And we've got to make the case that we want real freedom for you. We want a truth we want to speak the truth in love that really sets you free, not just politically free, but sets your heart free to do what is right in this world for the sake of others. And I think that's what's at stake. So I'm gonna turn it back to you, Mike, and say, what happens if you lose? If this is lost, I mean, I pray it's, like you said, Ninth Circuit Court. I think it's a neutral court now, maybe, but it still moves against this kind of stuff for us. But what if we lose this thing? And then, of course, what if we win?
Well, if we lose, it's really the same consequence, just two different sides of the coin, right?
Okay.
Whether we lose or we win. From a legal perspective, it's precedent, right? Now precedent is established. So First Liberty Institute, we're obviously very aware of that. We know the risks that are involved, but we feel like it's too important to just stand idly by, right? Okay. If we allowed the risk of losing and setting bad precedent to always stop us from doing the right thing, then, I mean, that's how freedom slips away and is lost. And so we have to be willing to take some of those risks in order to advance freedom and advance religious freedom. And so that's what we're doing. And so if we win, obviously that's going to set positive precedent. But then I think, so that's just from the legal perspective. Then I also think you have to look from the cultural perspective, and that when, and let's use a different example. Let's use another case that we've talked about on here, the Coach Kennedy case. Right. And I think what happens is other people begin to see, it just takes that one person, or in this case, those two people who say, you know what, I'm willing to make a stand. I'm willing to take a stand. I'm willing to take risk to do this, because it's not just about me anymore, right? That if this is happening to me, this is happening to hundreds, thousands, possibly millions of other people. And you start to see that it's that spark of light where people say, you know what, if those two flight attendants can take a stand and they're in the Ninth Circuit and they're willing to do this, you know, maybe I need to take a stand,
right?
And so courage begets courage, and it's contagious. And so that's, I mean, as somebody who served in the military, you know, our history books are filled with stories and examples of where all it took was one person in a heated battle to say, you know what, this needs to be done. I'm willing to risk my life to go and do it to make sure we accomplish our mission. And so they, you know, go over the top, or they go and charge a machine gun nest. And then all of a sudden, what do you see? Everybody else starts to say, hey, we can't let him go alone. We've got to go with him. And I think that's what's going to happen culturally in this case. So that's, to me, that's the even more important effect of the Alaska Airlines case, is not just the legal precedent that it sets, but the cultural precedent that it's going to set.
Right.
Yeah, and I do think in that regard that the personal embodiment of courage in the public square is now embodied in Justice Samuel Alito, who has taken an enormous amount of criticism in the last month for doing the right thing. And it was him, Justice Alito, in one of the most infamous cases in Supreme Court history, who warned us, Greg and Mike, of the new orthodoxy. Do you remember that phrase, the new orthodoxy? Right. And when he sent up that warning sign, it wasn't too long after that the kind of cases we're talking about emerged. And the Alaska Airlines case, the Coach Kennedy case, these are part and parcel of the new orthodoxy.
Well, and what's amazing about this case too, and I like how you shared it with us, Mike, and thanks again for your work on this, because defending this is not just defending it for these two folks like you talked about, it's defending it for all of us. they weren't positing agendas. You can see there are people who come to work and they're super political and they're always spouting political stuff. That, again, that's not us, and that's not these two. They're model employees. They merely are questioning something that's kind of being shoved down their throats, and bang, this is what happens. And so if this isn't a case we can win, yikes, because then who knows what's next. But again, like you just said, courage. And Tim, I'm just going to throw this back to you. The church needs to understand we need to contend for the truth too. Satan loves to tell lies. Satan loves to actually whisper in our ears things that God does, that he's, just like he said to Eve in the garden, did God really say, let me tell you something else? And so there's a certain sense where we've lost this idea that we need to contend for the truth. We need to actually fight so that we can serve. And so we need to, because the culture in which we live would love to put the church in the basement and put our service merely in our personal lives out of view of everybody else. And God calls us to jump into the mix, to be a part of the chaos with his truth, with the truth of the scripture. Because like Jesus says, if you abide in me, you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Now, please go speak for the truth, contend for the truth, because these people are worth it. Do our people need to wake up to the knowledge that just because it's getting a little tougher in the culture doesn't mean that we don't have something to do? I hear, like, you were very positive. You're always optimistic. And I guess I'm asking the question, shouldn't we be optimistic now that this opportunity has come for us to contend for the truth for the sake of others?
Well, I consider it to be an honor to live in this age. This is a tough age to live in, especially if you happen to believe that the Bible is true. But,
Right.
We have an extraordinary series of models in this regard. And Greg, to your point, and Mike from earlier, that my favorite one is Martin Luther. People forget that in the whole of Western civilization, I mean, literally from the dawn of time, there may not have been a better friend of the conscience than Martin Luther.
Right.
When at the most pivotal chapter of all of America, of all of Western history, he steps into the public square. He says, on a question of conscience, pure conscience alone, I have to take a particular stand. He said, I can't do any other, because my faith and conscience demand this. And so whether it is two former employees of Alaska Airlines or the great Martin Luther, it turns on the same principle. And we know that Luther prevailed, truth did prevail. And I believe in this instance and in the Coach Kennedy case, truth will prevail and the right will happen. It doesn't always, but that is not to say that it never does. And in this example, I think the facts rooted in truth are on the right side of history.
Well, Mike, be of good cheer. You be courageous. Thank you for entering into the fight, and thank you for First Liberty entering into the fight. Tim, when you even said that, whether we win or lose, what always happens, even at the darkest moment, is the light does shine. And so we're going to pray for that. And for our listeners, be vigilant, be courageous, realize that you've been given the ability to contend for a time just like this, because now is the time to even fight for the right to be faithful to God and faithful to God for the sake of others. Again, thanks again, guys.
Thanks, Greg.
Thanks, Greg.
Thanks for tuning in today. To get to know our LCRL DC work better, check out our website at lcrlfreedom.org. Till next time, God bless you always. I'm Gregory Seltz. Have a great week.
You've been listening to Liberty Alert with Dr. Gregory Seltz, Executive Director of the Lutheran Center for Religious Liberty in Washington, D.C. This program has been brought to you by the Lutheran Center for Religious Liberty.